In January 1945, Hans Frank's stolen art collection was divided. Leonardo and Rembrandt were among the paintings carried west into Bavaria. The Raphael was not. It was apparently left behind in occupied Lower Silesia, too large for the group Frank chose to take with him. Days later, another transport arrived to collect the remaining crates. According to post-war testimony, the portrait was not on that truck either. Somewhere between a palace in Silesia and the German border, one of the most valuable paintings in Europe simply dropped out of the record. It has never been seen again. This painting left behind two mysteries, not one. The first is where it went. The second, quieter but just as unresolved, is whose face disappeared with it. The title calls him Raphael. The face does not settle the matter. Picture the young man everyone associates with this portrait, even though the picture itself has not been seen since the war. A confident face, staring straight out of the frame with an ease that borders on arrogance. A white linen shirt gathered into soft folds, a heavy cloak of dark sable falling over the left shoulder, a flat black cap over dark, wavy hair. Behind him, a warm, plain wall opens into a window, and beyond it, a hazy landscape. One hand rests on a carpeted table. The other presses gently against the fur at his chest. That reading is not wrong. It is just incomplete. Before we can ask who this is, we have to admit something more basic. We do not actually know what color this painting is. No known color photograph of the original survives. What exists are black and white negatives, written descriptions, painted copies, and a handful of color reproductions made before the war, including one produced in Kraków in 1909 and a more careful one from 1938. These preserve someone's interpretation of the colors. They are not a direct record of the pigments themselves. The green wall you picture right now, the rich brown of the fur, the warm tone of the skin, all of it is plausible. None of it is verified. Every image circulating today is, in a very real sense, a guess dressed up as a fact. Now the identity. For centuries, this canvas was simply called Raphael's self-portrait. No question mark attached. That confidence rests on comparison rather than proof. The sitter has been measured against Raphael's presumed self-portrait in the Uffizi, and against the face traditionally identified as his own in the fresco he painted for the Vatican, the School of Athens. The resemblance is real enough to sustain the theory. It is not precise enough to prove it, and once you start looking for the gap between resemblance and certainty, other details start to complicate the picture too. If we assume for a moment that this really is Raphael, something about it still feels deliberately withheld. Painters who put themselves on canvas do not always reach for a brush or a sketch, but Raphael's hands here are entirely empty, and empty in a way that seems chosen rather than incidental. One scholarly reading treats this as the opposite of concealment. By around 1513, Raphael was no longer an ordinary craftsman with paint under his nails. He was overseeing the frescoes in the papal apartments, running a large workshop, and would soon be named chief architect of St. Peter's Basilica. The writer Baldassare Castiglione was defining, in these very years, an ideal he called sprezzatura, the art of making enormous effort look like no effort at all. Empty hands, in that light, are not a lie about the sitter's profession. They are the clearest possible advertisement of how far he had traveled from the workshop floor, from a tradesman's trade to a courtier's ease. That transformation is worth sitting with, because it explains more about this picture than any single anecdote from Raphael's life. He had been born into a painter's household and lost both of his parents before he reached his teens, which forced him to take over a family workshop as essentially a child. By the time this portrait was likely painted, none of that early instability was visible anywhere in his circumstances. Pope Julius II, a pope defined by military campaigns, had died in 1513, and his successor, the Medici Pope Leo X, treated Raphael less like a hired painter and more like a favored courtier. If the sitter really is Raphael, the fur, the empty hands, and the relaxed, direct gaze may be recording that social ascent more precisely than any biography could. The clothing is not costume. It is evidence of exactly where he now stood. There is a second layer of doubt sitting underneath the first, and it does not concern who this man was, but whether he was a man at all. The German art historian Oskar Fischl raised the possibility that the sitter might not be male. Later interpretations pushed that suggestion further, wondering whether the model could have been Margherita Luti, the woman later remembered as Raphael's most enduring attachment. Raphael was formally engaged for years to a cardinal's niece named Maria Bibbiena, and kept delaying the marriage until she died still waiting. His real devotion, by most accounts, belonged elsewhere, to a baker's daughter he never married. Fischl's theory survives only if the visual details actually support it, so it is worth checking them one at a time, the way a courtroom would check a witness. Look again at the fur, no longer as a symbol of the sitter's status, but as physical evidence. Sable was never simply warm or fashionable in this period. It was an unmistakable, expensive signal of privilege and proximity to elite circles, worn by very few people and instantly recognized by everyone who saw it. That much is solid ground regardless of who is wearing it. Now the hands again, this time as a second kind of evidence. If this figure really is Margherita, posed in a lover's borrowed clothing rather than her own, the same empty hands that flatter Raphael as a courtier could equally read as a disguise, a lack of any tool or object that would anchor the sitter to a specific gender or trade. The detail cuts both ways, and that is precisely why it has kept historians arguing for centuries rather than settling the question. The face is where the argument tightens further. The jaw is soft, the lips are full, loose ribbons trail from the sleeves, a detail more commonly seen in portraits of women from this period than in portraits of men. Some scholars read these features not as evidence of a disguise at all, but as part of a deliberately idealized image, a face refined beyond the ordinary, individual markers of a specific man, closer to a philosophical type than a likeness. That reading and Fischl's theory cannot both be simply true, but both remain live possibilities precisely because nobody has been able to examine the actual brushwork, the actual bone structure beneath the paint, in more than 80 years. Technically, this portrait does something unusual, regardless of who sat for it. Raphael places two different modes of painting directly beside each other. Atmospheric softness in the face and the hazy landscape behind it, borrowed from techniques associated with Leonardo, and tactile, almost sculptural precision in the fur, the linen, and the patterned carpet beneath the sitter's hand. Skin that seems to breathe next to fur you feel you could touch. That contrast is not decoration. It is the entire argument of the painting compressed into paint. The soft and the solid, the ambiguous and the certain, sitting on the same canvas without resolving into either one. Even the color scheme carries a reading worth mentioning, though carefully. The stark white of the shirt against the deep black of the fur can be interpreted symbolically. A body divided between softness and authority, exposure and protection. And Raphael moved for years in Roman circles, where Neoplatonist ideas about matter and spirit were part of ordinary intellectual conversation. Nothing proves he intended a fixed, deliberate code here, but the contrast is striking enough, and the intellectual environment specific enough, that dismissing the connection entirely would be its own kind of overconfidence. For now, every scientific route to settling any of this is closed. Unless the panel itself resurfaces, there can be no infrared scan to reveal an underdrawing, no X-ray to check for a softened jaw or an altered hairline, no pigment analysis to confirm the true colors, no examination of the wood itself to help fix a date. Every argument on every side of this debate is being built from black and white photographs of an object nobody alive has been permitted to study directly. Which brings the story back to the other mystery, the one about geography rather than identity, and to how a painting this valuable simply stops existing on paper. The panel had already survived nearly 2 centuries of danger before the Nazis ever touched it. An Italian noble family owned it for generations before a Polish prince, Adam Jerzy Czartoryski, purchased it around 1800. During an uprising against Russian rule in 1830, it was smuggled out to Paris to keep it from being seized by the Tsar's soldiers. Decades later, facing financial pressure, the family tried and failed to sell it in London and in Berlin. During the First World War, it was hidden again, this time in Dresden, and recovered only with difficulty once Poland regained its independence. By the time German forces reached it, this small wooden panel had already outlasted a century and a half of exactly the kind of danger that was finally about to catch it. On the 18th of September 1939, the Gestapo broke open a bricked-up hiding place on the family estate at Sieniawa and pulled the panel out along with a cache of jewelry. It was catalogued as item number 141 on the official Nazi inventory of art looted from occupied Poland. What happened next says a great deal about how the Nazi leadership actually operated behind its own propaganda. Hitler wanted the portrait for a planned museum in Linz. Goering wanted it for his private collection at Karrenhall. But Hans Frank, the governor running occupied Poland, simply kept it for himself, hanging it in his own office inside Wawel Castle, treating a stolen national treasure as office decoration, while he oversaw the machinery of an occupation that would kill millions. By January of 1945, with the Red Army advancing, Frank began evacuating his looted collection westward. 20 paintings traveled with him toward Bavaria, including the Leonardo and the Rembrandt that would later be found intact in his final hiding place. The Raphael, apparently too large for that initial group, stayed behind in Lower Silesia. A second transport was arranged to bring the remaining crates west. Post-war testimony indicates the portrait was not among them either. No single dramatic theft explains its disappearance. Instead, there is a gap a stretch of chaotic, collapsing territory between an occupied palace and a shrinking front line, somewhere inside which the painting simply stopped being accounted for. One man spent much of his life trying to close that gap. Karol Estreicher, a Polish art historian working alongside the American occupation forces after the war, personally helped recover other looted masterpieces, including a medieval altarpiece and Leonardo's own Lady with an Ermine. He interrogated former Nazi officers for years and kept an exhaustive diary of every lead he chased down. The Raphael was the one case that never closed. He spent decades pursuing a painting that never resolved into an answer. There is one more thread in this story, and it deserves to be told without more certainty than the record actually supports. In 1953, a Polish diplomat named Stefan Zamoyski hoped to question a Swiss architect named Wilhelm Ernst von Palaisieux again about the painting's fate. Palaisieux had worked closely with Frank's circle during the final months of the war and was among the last people known to have handled the crates. The meeting Zamoyski hoped for never took place. Several weeks before it was due to happen, Palaisieux was killed in a car accident. The coincidence is unsettling. The surviving record does not prove he was carrying any particular revelation, and it does not prove his death was connected to the missing Raphael at all. Sometimes a mystery does not offer a villain, only an unanswered question and a silence that outlived the man who might have filled it. Legally, at least, the picture is simpler than the painting itself. In 2016, the Polish government purchased the entire Czartoryski collection outright, including the formal legal claim to this missing portrait, for 100 million euros. That purchase did not prove the state believes the panel physically survives somewhere. What it guarantees is narrower and more concrete. If the painting ever does resurface, there will be no ambiguity about which institution has the right to demand it back. Rumors over the decades have placed it in Swiss vaults, in Scottish castles, in private collections scattered across South America. In 2012, a Polish official briefly claimed it had surfaced in a bank vault in Switzerland, and the story raced around the world before collapsing into an admitted hoax within days. If it were ever authenticated and legally cleared for sale, museum and restitution specialists have suggested it would be valued at well over $100 million. Walk into the National Museum in Kraków today, into the room where the surviving Leonardo and the surviving Rembrandt still hang, and you will find something the museum has never removed: an empty 16th century gilded frame, mounted on the wall exactly where the Raphael used to hang, marking the space where it belongs, rather than filling it. Museums replace or store away empty frames constantly. This one has stayed exactly where it is for decades, a physical marker of an unreturned object and, unofficially, one of the most quietly devastating monuments to the Second World War that most visitors walk straight past. A portrait normally gives its audience a surface to keep returning to. You can walk closer, test an interpretation against the actual paint, notice a detail an earlier viewer missed. That process is the entire reason a channel like this one exists. Because finished paintings never really finish telling their story. An empty frame denies its audience even that argument. It keeps every competing theory alive precisely because the one object that could finally settle any of them, prove official right or wrong, confirm or deny the self-portrait, fix the true colors once and for all, is simply not there to be tested. We may never know whose face this really was. We may never see its true colors, never read the underdrawing beneath the paint, never learn for certain what happened to it between a Polish palace and a shrinking German front line in the spring of 1945. What we lost was never only an object. We lost the evidence that could tell us how a painter revised a face, built a surface, and decided exactly what kind of person this sitter was meant to become. Somewhere, perhaps, a 500-year-old panel of poplar wood still exists behind a wall, inside a vault, in an attic nobody has bothered to clear out in decades. If that gaze is still out there, staring at nothing in the dark, what does it think it's still waiting for?